Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting the session, Preventing Another Sandoz, Baia Mare or Beirut Accident, Perspectives on Risk Management in the Context of the Sendai Framework. I'm Dimitri Mariassin, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this thematic discussion, which will focus on industrial and chemical accidents and the management of risks related to those accidents. Today's event is about connecting different aspects of it. At ECE, we work on Industrial Accidents Convention. Our lens is focused on industrial and chemical accidents, but of course, we're conscious of the larger framework that we're part of. Technical accidents such as industrial and chemical events are part of the risks that should be governed by the Sendai Framework. The Sandoz chemical spill, for example, and the Baia Mare cyanide spill are examples of accidents with such a big impact that they triggered a policy response, changed the way governments approach the issue, and we think Beirut accident may actually lead to the same. Today, we're talking about how these different policy responses can enable further disaster risk reduction, being part also of the risks addressed under the Sendai Framework. This is why I'm very happy to be co-moderating this event with Ricardo Mena, Director of the UN Disaster Risk Reduction here in Geneva. And I'm also happy that this event is being co-organized together with the European Investment Bank, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the governments of Norway and Slovenia. With this short welcome from me and passing it on to Ricardo, and I will be back with you for the second part of the session to moderate. Ricardo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Very glad to see you on screen. Thank you for this introduction, and to all the organizing partners for the opportunity to participate as the co-moderator of this important preparatory event of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction. I would like to highlight the productive cooperation between UNDRR and UNECE and the different agencies and organizations working collectively to improve disaster risk management. UNECE is an important partner for UNDRR in supporting implementation of the Sendai Framework on the ground through legal instruments such as the Industrial Accidents and Water Conventions. As you all know, the Sendai Framework covers a wide scope of hazards, including natural and man-made hazards and related technological, environmental, and biological hazards and risks. We also greatly value the cooperation with EIB, OECD, Norway, and Slovenia in organizing today's thematic session, which is the first preparatory meeting of this year's EFDRR. So if we can perhaps move to kick off the session, I would like to invite our first speaker, Ms. Elisabeth Sorbo Ersether, Director General of the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection, DSB, from Norway, to share her welcoming opening remarks.
Dear colleagues, it's an honor and a privilege to me to be invited to opening of this session. During these days at the European Forum, countries will adopt the roadmap 2021 to 2030 for disaster-resilient European and Central Asian region in 2030. This roadmap supports a better understanding and communication of existing, emergent, and future disaster and climate risk for increased action and investment. I believe the roadmap will be a good tool and instrument to us all. The task of the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection, which I'm heading, is maintaining and complete overview of various risks and difficult words, dear colleagues, vulnerability in society in general. Our responsibilities cover local, regional and national prevention, preparedness and emergency planning. We are the national focal point to the Sendai Framework, competent authority to the UNECE Industrial Accident Convention and to the EU Seveso III Directive. This gives us a special opportunity in bridging natural disasters and industrial accidents. We indeed need to understand, and not at least to communicate, existing and future risks better in our societies. One issue to work on, and that we will learn more about later in this session, is to understand the impact of natural hazards on hazardous installations. NATEC, the Natural Hazard Triggered Technological Accidents, is one area we really need to take into account. Such risks need to be managed. This is a responsibility, of course, for the operator of such an installation, as it has to be. However, the public authorities have an important role also at this field. The different conventions and directives that we work on are legal instruments for integrating natural disaster risk management and technological risk management. At the national level, we should work together for better understanding, better coordination and cooperation in order to identify natural hazards that can affect areas where hazardous installations are located, and not at least to share information on this, which is always a quite difficult topic. When it comes to climate changes, the threat of natural hazards becomes higher. We have heard everybody about the FN climate report and all that this can lead to. The communication with industry on this topic is quite crucial, I believe, to manage these risks. They are too large to do it on our own or alone. And we need to ensure that the preventive measures are taken. So I am very pleased that the international organizations on chemical accident preventions, preparedness and response are working together on this issue. There is no other way, to be honest. Their recommendations and guidelines will indeed be helpful for all countries in our region. Now, before I close my little speech, I have to remind us all about the importance of the 3 C's: communication, coordination, and cooperation between the sectors. This is both between national, regional, and local levels, within the country, but also between countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has really shown us the importance of this. And we must continue to improve and strengthen coordination across the different sectors and disciplines, whether this risk is about civil protection, health, land use planning, environmental protection, or protection of critical infrastructure, not at least. So indeed, working together gives better conditions for about everything, I would say. Making knowledge-based decisions, which again will strengthen cross-sectoral prevention and preparedness for disaster, and even build resilience to wide-ranging disruptive events. Dear friends, I wish you all the best for this session.
Thank you very much to the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection, an important party and current chair of the convention and a trusted ally in the prevention and management of transboundary industrial accidents and in supporting the implementation of the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction. Much appreciated. I would now like to introduce Mr. Bojan Dejak, Director General, Water and Investment Directorate of the Ministry of the Environment and Spatial Planning, Republic of Slovenia. Over to you, Bojan.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of today's thematic session, focused on chemical and industrial accidents. Greetings from Ljubljana. On behalf of Slovenian Ministry of Environment and Special Planning and of Slovenian Presidency of European Union as well. We are pleased and proud to be among organizers of this event. And we are pleased as well that chemical and industrial accidents have been given an opportunity to be addressed under the special session in the framework of 2025 event. Why? It's always the right time to speak about hazards, but we who work with these problems on daily basis, we know that there is a narrow window of opportunity when it comes to the particular disaster, and when we can raise the expectation and bring together community and public as well, and to raise preparedness for the response to the accidents. Time when management of accidents risk was left to sole responsibility of firefighter service are long over. We that know very well from Slovenia. We have in last years some local events, accidents, with not only minor, and we put it together and need also broader and more mainstreamed environmental, climate, science, research, economic, infrastructure, and as well financial policies. I like to inform you that in the framework of the European Resilience Framework, we put a great part of financial means to this part of our infrastructure, and we will restructure all of our civil protection services to focus on industrial events because we have the election in past years. Well, as this reason is focused on chemical and industrial accidents, allow me to remind you that we speak of accidents as demonstrated by past events, which effects can be far-reaching in terms of severity of consequences to human health, the environment, and the property in terms of affected areas which can reach as well cross-border dimensions. It is important to keep all stakeholders in the disaster's risk reduction loop, as I speak it before, be it policy, experts, national, international, European, EU and international institutions and organizations on alert and aware of disaster risk and the necessity that take into account all relevant policy developments influencing the resiliency of the society towards this risk. I find extremely important that this is a result of a cooperation among more organizations and institutions that different in their nature, but still wishing to contribute to the spreading news of lessons learned, of good practices, of available tools, and networks of experts where advice and assistance to addressing disaster risk is available. Such events as well ensure that chemical industrial accidents remain having in place in community of Sendai accidents. So let the session begin, and let me conclude by wishing you a fruitful session and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dejak, for your presentation, which shows clearly Slovenia's involvement in fighting industrial accidents on multiple levels. Slovenia has shown leadership in international and transboundary disaster risk management, not in the least regarding technological risks. It has pushed the agenda on disaster risk management in the European Union, holding the current presidency, as well as beyond. I thank you for contributing to the organization of this event today. And I thank you also for keeping within the time, and I make a call to all the presenters participating in today's session to make sure that they do respect the time that is being allotted to each one of you. Thank you for that in anticipation. I would also like to remind that the participants can put questions or comments, and for that, please use the Q&A box to submit your statement or comments in writing. And during the Q&A sessions, there will be time for potential interventions. And if that's the case, either myself or Dimitri, one of the co-moderators, will ask you to request the floor. So I would like to invite all speakers to feel free to respond to the questions that will be put on the Q&A box, if you feel, of course, that they are under your area of expertise. So some practical announcements concerning interpretation and seminar documents will also be put on the announcement or chat box, so please be vigilant. We are now going to move to session 1 on chemical and industrial disaster risk, sense setter. And I would like to perhaps invite first Franziska Hirsch to make her presentation. And we will hopefully have Rachel McCann from OECD to follow up after Franziska. So Franziska, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Good morning, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, pleasure to be here. Now, I would like to speak in the following, next slide, please, or first slide, please, about the legal, policy, and regulatory frameworks covering and regulating chemical and industrial accident risk management. And I'm delivering this presentation on behalf of the co-organizing organizations of this event, so namely UNECE, the OECD, and the European Investment Bank. Now, let me start off with the Industrial Accidents Convention, hosted by UNECE, which I represent as secretary. Now, the convention was negotiated following the Sandoz chemical spill in Switzerland in 1986, which caused huge, devastating transboundary consequences, with a toxic red plume traveling along the Rhine River from Switzerland up to the Netherlands, France, Germany, following a fire. And that was the firefighting water that then leaked into the Rhine River. Now, at that stage in time, the Swiss authorities did not know whom to notify in the neighboring and riparian countries. And this was the trigger to say something has to be done to strengthen transboundary cooperation in accident prevention, preparedness, and response. And that situation has significantly changed now. The convention has now been in force over 20 years. Today we have 41 parties in the pan-European region, including the EU and 25 of its member states, Norway, Switzerland, all of the countries of Southeastern Europe, a large majority of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, and Kazakhstan. Now, the convention focuses on transboundary cooperation in accident prevention, Also through notification and information sharing about industrial accident hazards, installations that could cause, in case of an accident, a transboundary effect. And it also aims to mitigate the consequences of an accident in the case of should it happen and could it not be prevented. Now, it also covers the so-called NATEC accidents, the natural hazard triggered chemical events. Moving on to the next slide, please. The Convention progressively works towards the realization of its vision towards 2030 to be recognized as a legal instrument for risk reduction under the Sendai Framework and to also support the implementation of the SDGs. Now, to increase industrial safety and reduce the risk of technological disasters through its full implementation, and also to be an example for accident prevention and preparedness through transboundary cooperation within our region and also reaching beyond. Next slide, please. Now, in the 2019 Global Assessment Report for Disaster Risk Reduction, in fact, the Convention was recognized as being an example for disaster risk management, not only in the region, but also beyond. Now, on this slide, you see an example of the different safety guidelines and good industry practices which have been prepared under the Convention's auspices. Notably, its joint expert group on water and industrial accidents, which we share together with the Water Convention. And the implementation of these guidelines is being supported through our assistance and cooperation program. Now, moving on to the next slide, please. The Convention is very closely and inherently linked also with the European Green Deal, which aims to improve industrial accident prevention and also to improve the consistency with climate, energy, and circular economy policies. Next slide, please. Now, further to the Convention, in the European Union, I'd like to briefly mention that there are two legal instruments, namely the EU Seveso Directive, which is the EU's main instrument for the implementation of the Convention, and the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, which is also very closely linked with the conventions, in particular in the area of preparedness and response. Now, with the 2019 and 2021 amendments, these linkages have become increasingly close in terms of the transboundary provisions of the UCPM. Now, whereas the Seveso Directive covers major accident hazards and for both upper tier and lower tier installations, the UCPM asks member states to prepare risk assessments and overview of risk management capabilities, and the Commission to also prepare such an overview, also including transboundary provisions. Next slide, please. The European Investment Bank supports the implementation of the Convention and also the respective EU legislation through developing a guidance. We have jointly developed a guidance on land use planning and the siting of hazardous activities in order to mitigate the consequences of accident risks and supported its implementation. And Recur have been working together most recently jointly in preparing this event and in also preparing guidance on NATEC risk management. Moving on, next slide, please. Now I'd like to briefly speak about the OECD program on chemical accidents, which exists since over 40 years, now the flagship publication of this program are the guiding principles for chemical accident prevention, preparedness, and response, which are now being revised in their third edition. There is also a corporate governance guide for process safety, a guidance for ownership change, and currently, and we are supporting those efforts, the OECD is leading the preparation of a guidance on NATEC risk management. Next slide, please. There are also 4 OECD legal instruments, a mix of legal acts and recommendations, binding decisions, or a mix of both, which are now being reviewed and consolidated. Moving on, next slide, please. Now, there are other legal instruments such as the ILO conventions and also the WHO health regulation. Next slide, please. There are also other policy frameworks developed under the auspices of UNDRR, which we have supported as part of the interagency coordination group, namely the UNDRR Words into Action guidelines on man-made and technological hazards, in addition to some policy instruments developed by UNEP and the UNEP-OCHA Joint Environment Unit. And now moving on to the last slide, please. I would like to mention and to highlight that we are very closely working together among all these respective international organizations to support the implementation of existing legal and policy instruments, to help governments prepare chemical accident programs, and to build on the mutual linkages and complementarities. Now we are coordinating and carrying joint messages, notably the need to invest continuously in accident prevention, further to preparedness and response, among others through our interagency coordination group. And through our respective intergovernmental bodies and our governance frameworks, we support information exchange, identification of good practices, lessons learned, and their application. We're addressing emerging issues such as NATEC risk management, which are in the wake, on the rise in the wake of climate change. And we aim to foster governance and transboundary cooperation, advancing the policy dialogue and supporting capacity development jointly. And as such, as mentioned by the Norwegian Director General in the beginning, through communication, coordination, and cooperation, the 3 Cs, we're working together to strengthen this cross-sectoral cooperation, accident prevention, preparedness, and response, and as such, resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Franziska, for this good overview of the existing legal policy and governance frameworks that enable good governance of industrial and chemical accident risks. I'm going to now give the floor to Rachel McCann. Rachel is the chair of the OECD Working Party on Chemical Accidents and head of Emergency Planning Unit of the UK's governmental agency called Health and Safety Executive, to give us an overview of the particular and distinguishing nature of chemical and industrial accidents. Over to you, Rachel.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much for that introduction. Can I have my first slide up, please? As the Chair said, I'd like to talk to you today briefly, give you a little overview of chemical and industrial accidents and some of the things that we're particularly talking about today. Move on, please. So according to the UNEP Global Outlook 2, chemical production is soaring over the last decade. This is still something that is a really big industry and something very important for us to focus on. The size of the global chemical industry exceeded more than $5 trillion in 2017, and that's expected to double by 2030. The dependence on chemicals for technological progress across the world is increasing, and we're also seeing many substances being used for implementing new technologies that are hazardous. And it's therefore particularly important for us to carry on talking about chemical accident prevention, preparedness, and response as we focus on the green agenda, use of new technologies, hydrogen, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. It's also incredibly important, and that's why I'm so, back a slide, please. Sorry, move forward. Thank you. One of the reasons that we're really pleased that we've been invited today is it's incredibly important for us to talk about the fact that severe chemical accidents are continuing to happen across the world and across the EU. And it's important for us not to forget that this is such an important area of regulation and of response. Over the past decade, we've seen successive major accidents that have caused death, injuries, significant environmental pollution, and massive economic losses. Some of the accidents we've seen recently, we've seen the huge explosion in Beirut in Lebanon in 2020. We've seen significant accidents in Rouen in France, Tianjin in China, West Texas, all involving dangerous substances and leading to some significant losses. Recovering from industrial accidents can set development gains back significantly. It takes time and is expensive, and many of the places on that list are still suffering from events that happened many, many years before. Next slide, please. I've got some statistics here for you that come from the Major Accident Hazard Bureau of the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, which collates major accidents both in the EU and wider through the OECD and UNEC frameworks that my colleague Francisca mentioned before. You'll see that we've got 140 reports of major accidents that occurred within the EU. Seveso sites from January 2016 to October 2021, and we've got consequences identified for 135 of these accidents, and you can see the details there. We've had 44 fatalities and 6 accidents causing more than 10 injuries. I think the importance of showing this information is that these accidents that happen are still very significant. We're still seeing large numbers of deaths, injuries. We've got an example there of an incident in 2019 that led to more than 200 schools in a community being closed for several days. And in 2016, a refinery fire cost more than 8 million euros in damages. It's important to think with these industrial accidents that we're not just considering deaths and injuries, we're considering wider impact on communities, we're considering wider economic damage. And as I said previously, these things can lead to significant effects on wider communities that take a long time to recover from. Next slide, please. Couple of notable accidents that we've experienced in the EU over the last couple of months. Earlier this summer, in June 2021, a sulfur dioxide release at a pulp production site in Austria. One person was killed on site, but the importance of this accident is it highlighted challenges associated with emergency planning, specifically information to the public and crisis management. And some of the triggers in the accident go back to risk management and monitoring of aging equipment, things that are very important for us to consider within the OECD Working Party on Chemical Accidents. Later on this summer, in July 2021, there was an explosion at a waste management centre in Leverkusen in Germany. 7 people were sadly killed in that incident and 31 injured. Preliminary investigations are focusing on the condition that waste was stored and associated control measures. And again, waste management and the impacts of that is something that we're particularly seeing within our community as being an issue that needs to be controlled. Next slide, please. Another key area of focus for us that, again, my colleague Francisca mentioned is NATEC accidents. That's natural hazards such as earthquakes, floods or storms that can initiate events that may challenge the safety and operation of hazardous installations and trigger an accident. And the picture on the right there you can see is the eruption of the volcano in Palma in October this year. And that was the point at which the lava flow engulfed a cement factory. So again, it's very important for us to highlight the linkages between our two communities, and these major natural hazards can have a wider industrial impact. We are doing some work within our OECD Working Party. I'm doing that jointly with the UNEC Convention on NATEC hazards, and you can see a link to our guidance there and a joint seminar that's planned for later this year. Next slide, please. Just another piece of work I'd like to highlight that's been done through the Joint Research Centre since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic that I'd like to highlight is oxygen-related fires. All of us will be aware that since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, oxygen therapy has been discussed widely as a treatment for people suffering from this disease. But we've seen 46 fires associated with COVID-19 oxygen therapy since last May, and 26 of them have been fatal. And you can see there some other numbers that we're talking about of deaths. 92 in an incident in Iraq being the biggest one, and a number in Europe as well. Most of these incidents have occurred in developing countries, but 5 of them in the European Union, and 2 are fatal. There's a link on the slide there to a safety alert issued by the Major Industrial Hazards Bureau on the lessons learned from these fires and steps that can be taken to improve process safety in hospitals around oxygen-related fires. Next slide, please. Challenges ahead. The main challenges for us that we're working on at the moment, and we're keen to work jointly with this community, is to continue to help maintain a high level of safety across the industrial accident hazard community. We want to continue raising awareness of the risks and the costs of accidents, particularly at that higher policy level who can make decisions. We want to continue to make chemical accident prevention a priority for the sound management of chemicals, and we want to work with this group and others to integrate prevention, preparedness and response to chemical accidents with disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management, particularly in the area of NATEC accidents. Thank you very much for listening to me today. And now I think I and Francisca will be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very illustrative presentation, Rachel. And there is indeed a question that has been put on the question box. And I would like to read the question and invite Francisca and Rachel to comment on it. And the question is, has there been a study on the linkages, complementarity, or gaps between Seveso directives and the UNECE TAIA convention? Over to you, Francisca.
Yes, thank you for that very relevant question. Now, there has not been any specific study done. However, we've done our own analysis, and there are very close linkages, whereas the Seveso directive covers, let's say, all installations in the EU member states and the territory in terms of upper tier and lower tier that are all those that cover the hazardous substances in its Annex 1, and the convention only covers the upper tier installations, those that hold higher quantities of such substances, and those that could cause a transboundary effect to neighboring or riparian countries in case of an accident. Now, also in terms of the provisions, there are some areas in which the convention goes further, very much so with respect to transboundary cooperation, for example, the development of joint or harmonized off-site contingency plans. And there are other areas where the Seveso directive goes further, such as the preparation of a major accident prevention policy, or also when it comes to land use planning and siting provisions. These are a bit more specific when it comes to the Seveso directive. Now, these are just a few examples. At the same time, I believe it's a very interesting proposal. It would be of interest to do such a study on the complementarities, linkages between the Industrial Accidents Convention, the Seveso Directive, and I think here one can very well add also the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. Now, having said this, I just like to add that obviously there is a difference in terms of the parties to the convention and then the Union Civil Protection Mechanism participating states, which go beyond the EU member states, also covering some of the convention's parties, and naturally the Seveso Directive, which is binding for the EU member states and at the same time is also being applied or approximated to by countries in the Western Balkans and also some in the EU's eastern neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisca, for this comprehensive response to the question. And I would also like to invite Rachel for any additional points that she would like to raise.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, it is an extremely interesting question. I think the only thing I would add is through the interagency cooperation that happens between OECD, UNECE, EU, the other parties, is we work to ensure that whilst the they aren't identical, that there is certainly no contradictions between the legal instruments and between the guidance that's produced from the other agencies as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much again to both our presenters, Franziska Hirsch and Rachel McCann. And let me then move to our session number 2, which will be looking at revisiting the Sendai priorities using a chemical disasters risk lens. So we will now move into this panel discussion and, a better understanding of risk, better risk governance, increased investment in risk reduction, and enhancing preparedness and building back better to strengthen resilience are the 4 priorities for action of the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction. And these are relevant for all types of risks. So in this session, we will examine how they are particularly relevant for the management of risks related to industrial and chemical accidents. Each of the panelists will have between 3 to maximum 5 minutes to introduce key findings of how industrial and chemical accidents relate to one of the Sendai Framework's priorities for action. And I would like to start to first ask Jasmina Karba of the Republic of Slovenia to talk to us. And over to you, Jasmina.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and a good day from Ljubljana to all participants to this thematic session. Now, if you allow me shortly to introduce myself. So, Jasmina Karba, working for the Ministry of Environment and Spatial Planning of the Republic of Slovenia in the Environment Directorate. I have been part of the industrial accidents community now for about 20 years, and I'm also currently a proud member of the Bureau to the Convention on the Transboundary Aspects of Industrial Accidents. Now, I'm still very much interested in this matter, and actually I sometimes get quite passionate about it, especially when it comes to understanding the underlying causes and the prevention of chemical and industrial accidents. Now, the question that has been posed by the chair is actually an excellent starting point for addressing first priority area of the Sendai Framework, where the need for focused actions has been recognized, and that this is addressing, understanding, and I underline addressing, understanding disaster risk. It seems as if speaking of basic principles versus the details is like zooming out to broader perspective of disasters risk and then zooming back in to bring in the details in focus. And in chemicals and industrial accident prevention, both is equally important. And I think that the answer to the question actually depends on the lens of a stakeholder in disaster management loop, meaning that different level of understanding is required from different stakeholders. Now, let me explain. In general, understanding disaster risk is a prerequisite for a successful management of all steps in the disasters management loop. That is to say in prevention, preparedness, and response. And rightly, it has been recognized as first priority area in the Sendai Framework. Now, what does this actually mean? It means that each element in the chain of responsibilities for risk reduction needs to understand the risk to the level of the detail that is necessary to simply realize the responsibility. And for the operators of hazardous facilities, This means that understanding risks to the level of valve detail, and for policy developers, this means being aware of hazards and risks at the level of their national or regional magnitude. The importance of understanding the nature and characteristics of hazards and risks is true for all types of accidents, but needs to be seen from a slightly different angle when it comes to chemical and industrial accidents, which do require somehow and slightly unique risk reduction approach. And this is due to two most important characteristics of these types of accidents. And first, what I would like to mention is a first characteristic, which is actually a beauty of chemical and industrial accidents, that they can be prevented. That is to say that they can be prevented if operation of facilities is ensured if safe operation is ensured at all circumstances. And unlike to other types of accidents, speaking of prevention in the context of chemical and industrial accidents does not mean speaking about prevention of harmful consequences and limiting losses, but it really relates to preventing accidents as such from happening. And this can be done and should be done based on proper understanding of hazards of human or technological failures, which could then lead to uncontrolled releases of hazardous substances, and then also these releases be turned into major chemical or industrial accidents. I mean, it may sound easy and straightforward, but in reality, it is a complex task, and it needs to be ensured at all times of the operation of an establishment. Now, to the second characteristic of chemical and industrial accidents. It is that the control over the risks of these accidents is a combined effort of operators of hazardous facilities and of administrations, in most cases of private and public side. Ideally, both sides go hand in hand and operate as one system. But the principal responsibility lies on operators of hazardous facilities. It is them who need to understand each and every technical and organizational detail of their operation as I said before, to the level of each and every valve on the side of their operation. Because this is the only way they will ensure safe operation of facilities they operate. But then, on the other side, understanding risk is required also for the functioning of administrative mechanisms that are put in place for the control of disaster risks. Also, within these mechanisms, understanding the risks in terms of operational characteristics and safety measures of a specific facility is necessary, especially for performing actions such as issuing operational permits and performing on-site inspections. And understanding risk is also acquired for shaping national, regional, or local risk reduction policies. But I think here basic principles could be sufficient. I mean, basic principles showing the magnitude of risks, such as location of hazardous facilities and characteristics of accidents in terms of the severity of consequences. And now I would like to slowly close my intervention, but and this would be my last message that I would like to convey, namely that when it comes to understanding risks, there is guidance and support available through products and actions of institutions who are organizers of this session. At the international level, UNECE and OECD also operate as platforms of practitioners who meet regularly to exchange experience, good practice, new knowledge. This means that they have created families of practitioners who make sure also that the knowledge is being monitored, is being recorded, and is being passed from more to less experienced. And this I think, is their priceless contribution of actions to priority areas of Sendai Framework. And with this, dear colleagues, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jasmina, for your valuable insights on the linkages with the Sendai Framework Priority for Action number 1. I would like to move on, and I would like to ask Toril Tandberg, Chair of the Industrial Accidents Convention and member of the Bureau of the OECD Working Party on Chemical Accidents from the Directorate of Civil Protection of Norway, to take the floor and reflect on the question if current risk governance frameworks are well equipped to deal with both the unique characteristics and the details of industrial and chemical accidents on disaster risk reduction. Taking UNECE and the OECD as examples, what works well? What do you think is still missing? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, for your introduction and for your interesting and important questions. And I will say from the previous speaker, my good colleague Rachel McCann, we now have an overview of what chemical and industrial accidents have been in the past. And many of them caused, as she said, catastrophic consequences like loss of human lives, harm to human health and the environment, properties and critical infrastructure. But these accidents still happen, and that is some of the challenge we all face. And what also the Secretary of the UNECE Industrial Accident Convention mentioned, that the framework came in place. The work started actually back in the 1980s, and we now have developed and implement control frameworks to cover all aspects of chemical accident prevention, the emergency preparedness and mitigation of accidents, emergency response and follow-up to accidents. So in addition to these frameworks, there has been also especially importance in recognizing the appropriate roles of all stakeholders, including industry management, the workers, the public, as well as local and national authorities. So all this is in place as a frame, and I would say that the legal instruments for preventing industrial accident and disasters are in good place, and the national regulation have used those international instruments to follow up. And if we now compare chemical and industrial accidents with natural hazards, we need to remember and know that these risks, they have an owner, so to speak, and the risk owner has created the hazards and operates the installation that is causing the hazard, and thus need to have the competence to manage this hazard and is responsible and liable for any damage caused by the hazard. And at the other hand, these risk owners, they normally make profit. They earn money from the existing installation. So they have a huge responsibility. And the key responsibility for the industry, they are also outlined in several of the international legal framework and the national frameworks. And I will especially mention that from the OECD, there is a guidance on corporate governance for process safety and for senior leaders in high hazard industry, and this guidance underline exactly what Jasmina Karba just mentioned, is the importance of identifying, knowing, and most of all understanding the hazards and be able to take the necessary preventive measures. And in what we have when we have been discussing with industry, it's important that we and from that OECD guidelines, we urge them, the senior leaders in industry, to ask themselves some questions like, do you know what the major accident risks are for your organization? Do you know what your main vulnerabilities are, and what are you doing with them? And how concerned are you about the level of risk? And how confident are you that all the safety systems are performing as they should? And do you seek not only the good news when you are talking with your workers and in your organization, do you also seek out the bad news, explaining that what you need to do with to make a higher level of safety standard on your site? And if there is an incident, do you blame Andy? Who do you blame? Do you blame others or yourself? And are you doing all you can to prevent a major accident? So this is really important that the risk owners take this role. And for the authorities, it's important that we make use of relevant legal instruments and guidance, that we also know the risks, and that we establish arrangements for land use planning in order to mitigate possible off-site effects of a chemical accident, recognizing also the need to take into account the possibility of chemical accidents which are capable of causing transboundary consequences. And I will also repeat what has been already said by my Director General. The public authorities, they have a special responsibility for the cooperation, the collaboration, and the communication of this risk, to see that the governance of the risk are taken seriously by all parties and by all stakeholders. And what works well and what is missing? Well, I think what has already been mentioned of sharing lessons and experience, that works very well. The legal instrument works very well. They are in place, but they need to be followed up and they need to be enforced. And when it comes to new technology development due to the Green Deal, green transition and smart technology, we will have new energy carriers like hydrogen and ammonia. We have the battery technology. How can we meet those challenges? We already have instruments of risk assessments methodologies. They are in place. We know how to deal with hazardous substances, but we have to put them into a kind of other it's led by other stakeholders. Maybe it's stakeholders that do not have safety first in their priority. So I think this is something we need to work with in the future. And I will be happy to discuss this more later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Tori Thunberg for this interesting response to the question dealing with Sendai Framework Priority for Action 2, which is on governance. And of course, governance and financial resources are closely linked. Without financial resources, knowledge and infrastructure are difficult to plan and manage, let alone to build back better after an event. Bartholomew Jude, environmental specialist at the European Investment Bank, comes next, and I would like to request Bartholomew to give us a lead on options and challenges for financing specifically dedicated to industrial and chemical risks. So over to you, Bartholomew.
Good morning. Thank you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be part of the European Disaster Risk Forum at such an important time for helping our societies to prevent and mitigate industrial accidents and adapt to the effects of natural disasters. The European Investment Bank is the lending arm of the European Union. We are the biggest multilateral financial institution in the world and one of the largest providers of climate finance. You may be thinking, what is a bank doing on a platform such as this? But hopefully you will see by my presentation that in fact we need more banks, more finance and more cohesive efforts to meet the challenges that we are currently facing. Next slide, please. The EIB finances eligible projects related to reconstruction and prevention of natural and industrial disasters. In the last 15 years, the EIB has supported projects with a total value of over 19 billion euros in this sphere. Flood management projects are the largest part of this, followed by earthquakes. And all of these present increased risks to our societies and to our industrial facilities, with also increased chemical risks. At the COP26 that just passed, the EIB launched the first dedicated adaptation plan aimed at strengthening investment and technical support to the projects from the impacts of more extreme weather, increasing climate resilience of existing and new infrastructure, which is very relevant to our discussions today. Next slide, please. The impacts of disasters on economic growth and jobs are rising. In fact, this slide, which I used only a few years ago, is already out of date. In Europe, disasters have caused 15 billion euros of damages each year on average over the past 10 years. The EU's largest investment instrument, the cohesion policy, aims at financing resilience, building back better, including climate change, by improving risk management to earthquakes, floods, droughts, fires, coastal erosion, which all, of course, can impact our industrial facilities and present chemical accident risks. The links between economic growth and disaster risk management have been underlined by the Sendai Framework, and they're never more prevalent and prominent than they are today. Next slide, please. So as Toril said, we need to know, organizations need to know the risks and vulnerabilities of our facilities. And when we lend money, we use our standards to help inform us of these risks. So we have the EIB environmental and social standards, and this can be used by our promoters, our clients, in determining the needs for a comprehensive environmental and social risk assessment, which of course should include and account for natural man-made disasters, accidental risks, including industrial transboundary risks to which projects could be vulnerable. And this is front and forefront of our assessment these days. We work closely with the UNECE on the development of the Convention of Transboundary Effects of Industrial Accidents, where we've financed the development of guidance and worked closely with them on citing of hazardous activities and related safety projects, and also on focusing on seminars and joining the efforts such as today's. Next slide, please. Our EIB Climate Adaptation Plan, which I said recently launched, puts again the emphasis on the bank playing a more central and prominent role on adaptation finance inside but also outside of the EU. As part of this, the EIB will adapt to make sure that this adaptation finance reaches 15% of its climate action by 2025. The investment needs across the EU are estimated to be between 35 billion and 500 billion average annually. So this focuses on increased capital resources where it's most needed: coastal defences, flood management, preparing cities, extreme warning, early warning facilities, transport protection, health protection, industrial facilities, chemical facilities protection. Next slide, please. So behind all of these guidance, these objectives, these policies, there's very practical, real projects that we're financing, that we're working with. This one in the photo obviously is an event that occurred in Hungary in 2010, where there was a spill of red sludge from a residue of an aluminium production. We worked with the promoter to rehabilitate and reconstruct post this, and subsequently, next slide please, the promoter was able to implement a plan where they changed from generating sludge with their so-called red process to a so-called white process, and they are in the process of rehabilitating and reworking that area, which all works have now been completed. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And in February 2010, one of the most devastating floods for Madeira caused huge impacts. And again, we've worked closely with the Madeira government, and this is coming to the point of governance and cohesion of efforts. So floods, natural disasters have a broad approach. They don't just hit one set of infrastructures, and we need to have cohesive, governance, joined up policies. Next slide, please. So with this, we managed to reconstruct and build back better, which I hope will be a key theme to this forum over the next few days, of how we can make sure and ensure that our financing is best meeting the needs for disaster risk reduction, but also transboundary effects of industrial and chemical accidents. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you very much, Bartholomew, and your insights on the EIB's financial mechanism to support implementation of disaster risk reduction measures in a very practical way. Thank you very much. I would like to now move on and ask Svetlana Stirbu, who works as Health, Safety and Environmental Protection Specialist at ICS Danube Logistics, SRL, in the Republic of Moldova. If the insights of the previous panelists can be applied in practice in a transboundary setting, how could understanding governance and finance for industrial and chemical accident risk management be improved in practice? Over to you, Svetlana.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this session as a panelist and to share with you how it can work in practice, the transboundary cooperation of the implementation of the Sendai Framework provisions. Thank you for showing my slide and assisting me to move on for the next. Thank you. So I would like to show you the location of only the sea river port that the Republic of Moldova has it. And it is located at the border with Ukraine and Romania, and it's on the Danube River. This port consists of the several terminals, oil and cargo terminals, and it's a company that it's operator of the hazard of activities. Please, next slide. So the implementation of the provision of the Sendai Framework in our company, we have some, how can we do this and how it can work in reality. These activities are just listed here on this slide. It's like a research on the potential risk of man-made or natural hazards and the critical risk sources for the companies. And here, as an example, I can provide a joint study that we performed some years ago with the European Commission Joint Research Center that was using the rapid and the expertise in NATEC risk reduction to estimate the risk of our company or of our site due to earthquakes. And different other activities that we are doing. It's like, of course, developing and updating of the standard operational procedure plans on the prevention, preparedness and response to accidents. And in such a way, I can tell more about the one huge project that was performed in the framework of the TEA Convention of UNITEC Convention from the assistance program. It's such called Danube Delta project. And the general objective of this Danube Delta project, and it was to close cooperate on the transboundary level with our authorities, with the internal authority, with the mayor, and conducting in company different exercises, training, drills, and with other organizations, for example, like fire brigade, emergency departments, environmental authorities, and different authorities and inspectorates of industrial safety. Such cross-border cooperation with Romania and Ukraine through the Moldovan authorities that was performed by Danube Delta project. Please, next move slide. I can show you that what benefits or what it was for the company like priorities. And the general objective of the Danube Delta project was to improve the cooperation between the national authorities and industrial operators of Republic of Moldova, Romania and Ukraine in the Danube Delta region through the enhancing and where possible harmonizing the mechanism and approaches for the efficient and effective hazard and crisis management. For the first time, this project in Moldova was in 2015 started, where Moldova, together with Romania and Ukraine, tested how three countries can cooperate and to respond to an industrial accident with the possible transboundary consequences, such as an oil spill that might reach the Danube Delta. A field exercise took place in the territory of the Danube logistics company based on realistic scenario with the involvement of all relevant authorities. And the outcome of the project exercise, supported by development of strategies and procedure, and enhance the cooperation between organizations that have responsibilities on emergency prevention, preparedness and response, as well as operators. And the Republic of Moldova, in continuation, is applying UNICE safety guidelines, good practices, checklist, and other guidance that was using in this Danube Delta project. Next slide, please. As a continuation of the such project, we had this year in October an international management and coordination drill together with Romania that was in Giurgiu-Nerești International Freeport under the aegis of the General Inspectorate for Emergency Situation of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Republic of Moldova, and in collaboration with Romanian General Inspectorate for Emergency Situations. And the aim of this event was to test the joint intervention plan for emergency response. A result of this exercise and drill are using for improvement and for continuation to prevent all kinds of disasters. Please, next slide. So, in general, Republic of Moldova, the UNICE assistance program has proven to be an important driving force in the very effective mechanism for a sustainable implementation of UNICE Industrial Accident Convention, as also implementation of the provisions of Sendai Framework of Disaster Risk Management. And Danube Logistics as a company benefits from this mechanism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Svetlana Stirbo, for these interesting views coming from the private sector. With this, we come to an end of this session, and I have one question that I would like to put across our panelists and request them to potentially make a very short response with one phrase. Now, the question is long, but we want you to respond very, very briefly. And the question says, new policies are starting to acknowledge the systemic nature of risk and are addressing multi-hazard, multi-level governance, cross-border, interinstitutionally, and transboundary issues. So if management of single hazard risks, for example, focusing just on flooding through centralized governance with involvement of few institutions is already quite challenging, how would you suggest that stronger integration of all these links between countries, institutions, and topics can be achieved? And please, I ask you just one brief phrase to respond to this long question. So in no necessary order, whoever wants to jump first, please go ahead.
I'll start then to move us forward. One sentence, yes, from the European Investment Bank's perspective, systemic risks need to be addressed definitely cohesively, and more we have what's called framework loans to promoters, be they regional bodies, local governments, etc., to address risk from industrial accidents and chemical accidents, but natural disasters, looking at the whole system, how it can be protected. And the only way to do that is to have a cohesive framework financing system to ensure that lots of parties can have access to finance for a joined up system.
Great, thank you very much, Bartholomew. So cohesive framework and financial mechanisms. Very good. Thank you very much. So who wants to go next?
And I just... Okay.
Yes, please.
Yes,
sorry.
I will say that this, having experience both from the OECD and the UNECE, and knowing that the good cooperation between international organizations, this, I would say, should not be difficult. It is indeed a challenge, but I think the most important thing is not to work in silos, and to do the dissemination of the legal framework, and also to avoid the duplication of what we are doing. So working good together, I think this, and that is when the Sendai framework came up, we had a good contact with the UNDRR to say, look here, we do have the legislative framework when it comes to industrial accident prevention, preparedness and response. Do not reinvent the wheel, use it. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much, Toril. And now I would like to invite Jasmina, perhaps, and then Svetlana.
Yes, very briefly. Thank you very much, Chair. We look in complex times, and we deal with complex matters. So, our response needs to be complex as well. So, in this regard, and looking around us, what is happening, this systemic approach is really, I think, one of the key solutions to the challenges. But what to be done to really follow this approach? I think that first we need better understanding of such approach and of what needs to be done, that this is then implemented in practice, that we need better awareness of those, of everybody dealing with it, that this is really how our job shall be done. And then last but not least, what we do is hard work. Because it is really about hard work. Making this principles of systemic approach into practice. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jasmina. And we close with Svetlana. Please, Svetlana, one phrase.
Yes, thank you. Continuation of the capacity building, involvement of operators, and sharing the experience between all of us.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. So with this, thank you very much to Jasmina, Toril, Bartholomew, and Svetlana. I think it has been a very, very rich session. I thank you very much for your good insights and participation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Thank you for your patience and staying with us through the short break. And we're on to session 3, which will look at coherence between policies, industrial safety, disaster risk, and sustainable development, which links very well to the final question in the previous session. And the session will have 3 parts. First, looking at showcases, examples of policy coherence. Then we'll have an interactive poll. So we'll need all of you to be involved in this. And then finally, we'll look at COVID-19 implications for industrial and chemical safety. Before starting, let me just say that we believe that examples, powerful stories that actually showcase how policy coherence works are incredibly important. And we would like to today specifically look at one topic, is the interrelation between natural hazards and technological accidents, which has been mentioned before. And I'd like to start with Dr. Elisabeth Krausmann of the European Commission Joint Research Center and ask her to tell us about NATEC risks and how we can work to address both natural hazards and technological incidents, and what, in your view, policy coherence actually means. Elizabeth, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and welcome. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Somebody needs to launch my slides, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I will be talking to you about something that has already been mentioned by other speakers before, about NATEC risks. So NATEC risks are a class of cascading events that happen when the natural and the technological worlds collide. So I want to give you a brief background on that, and then show you how we deal with this kind of risk in the European Union. Here, just briefly, the definition, where is the term NATEC coming from? So it comes from the interaction, as I said, between natural hazards and technological installations, in this case, industrial installations that house, process, or transport hazardous materials. And the natural hazard impact can lead to the release of these hazardous substances that can be toxic, that can be radioactive, that can cause fires, explosions, and so on. And I want to start, because this is a question that often I get asked: is NATEC risk a real problem? So yes, it is. I mean, we've analyzed several industrial accident databases. We found that among the triggers of accidents there, 2 to 6%, depending on the database we looked at, were actually NATECs, but we also know that there is a reporting bias towards high consequence accidents. So the real number of NATEC accidents is higher. And something that we also found in our analysis, while natural hazards might not be the main trigger of industrial accidents, usually NATEC accidents have much higher consequences, for example, in terms of economic losses, than those triggered, for example, by human failure or technical failure, and so on. So I want to show you two examples. These are two examples that were actually quite important in the EU because they led to legislative changes together with other accidents that happened as well. One that was already mentioned by Dimitri in the beginning was the Baia Mare accident, where due to heavy rain and snow melt on a tailings dam, that dam breached and released toxic tailings sludge into several rivers, causing major pollution, major fish kills. Also, lots of other animals were killed because the pollution went through the food chain. And it was a major transboundary impact that affected about 2,000 square kilometers, 2,000 kilometers of the Danube's catchment area in several countries. Another one was a chlorine release due to flooding of a chemical facility. 80 tons of chlorine were released. Nobody was injured, fortunately, but it was a wake-up call in Europe on the dangers of NATEC risks. And I want to very quickly here just look a little bit at the factors that drive NATEC risk. There are many factors. Some of them obviously are related to the fact that NATECs are multi-hazard cascading risks, but I won't go into that. I want to focus on risk governance issues because there is still some work that we need to do there. First of all, I said it's a multi-hazard risk, which of course also means that the risk cuts across different stakeholder groups. And different domains, and these groups do not always talk to each other. So this is a bit of a problem. What we've also encountered is the act of God mindset, meaning it's a natural hazard, there's nothing I can do about it. That's right, but you can do something about the impact that that natural hazard might have on your installation. For NATECs with natural hazards having usually an extended impact, a territorial approach is needed. You cannot look at your industrial facility in isolation. You need to look at what are the surroundings of that installation. And we've also seen there are a bit of problems of free communications flow because sometimes responsibilities are fragmented between different ministries and actors, and some work needs to be done there as well. So how do we do it in the EU? First of all, I want to emphasize NATEC is a technological risk, although the trigger is natural. So this is very important. Technological risks have a risk owner that was already mentioned before, who's responsible legally and operationally for managing the risk. And we focus on prevention when we talk about technological risks. In the EU, we have the Seveso III directive, which is the major legislative act to deal with NATEC risks. It's the directive on the control of major accident hazards involving dangerous substances. And it explicitly requires the consideration of natural hazards in the safety document. So the operators need to identify possible major accident scenarios, their likelihood. It is mentioned in the directive, especially floods and earthquakes, but all natural hazards are meant, and they need to show what they've done to protect the facility against these hazards. Now, I want to show just a few examples in the European Union because the Seveso directive is goal-oriented. It says what needs to be achieved, but not how it should be achieved. I have 3 examples, Germany, France, and Italy here. They are all working in different ways on trying to protect, to identify the NATEC risks in their territories and make sure that their facilities are protected. As JRC, we are supporting them by developing tools for NATEC risk assessment. For example, we have a NATEC database to analyze for lessons learning purposes. We have developed NATEC risk management guidance for Seveso inspectors. We are now developing guidance for operators on how to implement NATEC risk management. And what I want to mention here too, because we have also talked about the UNECE Convention on the Transboundary Effects of Industrial Accidents. The EU member states are a party to the convention. And in fact, the Seveso III directive is the main legislative instrument that implements that convention into EU law. So we are collaborating very well also with UNECE. We have very fruitful collaboration because we have talked about the importance of international cooperation. And that brings me to my last slide. We are working with different institutions such as OECD, UNDRR, UN Environment, also WHO, so that we can share and exchange our knowledge related to NATEC risk management. And we are contributing together to different products, also in support of implementing the Sendai Framework. And OECD has already been mentioned by some people before. I want to mention here also the UNDR Sendai Words into Action Guidelines. We contributed to the Man-Made Technological Hazards Guide. We contributed a chapter to the National Disaster Risk Assessment Guide, as well as the GAR. So this is a very, very important aspect. And also, as Toriel mentioned before, to avoid duplication in what the different institutions are doing. And that concludes my short presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And indeed, what you highlighted about an integrated risk governance approach is extremely important. I specifically take away what you said about looking at it as a territorial issue, because for many countries this is part of integrated regional and local development planning. And from UNECE perspective, for example, we work a lot in program countries which are very much at a stage where the local and development plans are being formed, and if we can work together to influence how they are formed, I think that could have a strong impact on the resilience of these communities that host the facilities that are at potential NATEC risk. I see a hand from Bartholomew from the European Investment Bank. Bartholomew, is this a hand meaning you're eager to just have a very, very, very brief 20-second intervention, please, before we move to our next speaker? No? You're muted, Bartholomew. Okay.
It was a technical glitch. Apologies.
Okay. Anyway, thank you so much. We'd like to now move to an example from Belarus, and we'd like to hear from Mr. Evgeny Baranovsky, the Deputy Head of the International Cooperation Department at the Ministry of Emergency Situations in Belarus. And I think really building on some of the key messages that Elizabeth left with us, Evgeny will showcase how an integrated national strategy on disaster risk reduction and sustainable development might work specifically for technical, industrial, and chemical safety, in this case in Belarus. Please, Mr. Baranovsky, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, dear colleagues. Nowadays, within diverse international law, when we have different programs, strategies, plans, and goals to be achieved, the question is how to put everything together and make it works for each country. In Belarus, we found a solution in coherent policy in field of disaster prevention and response. More than 20 years ago, a strategic decision were taken to build up a unified system for protecting people's life and environment against emergency situations, any kind of natural disaster or industrial accidents. We call this system the State System for Disaster Prevention and Response. Simply speaking, this is our national platform for disaster risk reduction. This system unites all government bodies and organizations, local authorities, and other stakeholders in order to bring resilience to community and to provide sustainable development of the country. The system consists of Government Emergency Commission, Ministry for Emergency Situations, sectoral and territorial subsystems. The core and the main element of the system is the Ministry for Emergency Situations. This is one government body which is responsible for any kind of risks related to disasters. Ministry carries out the policy in field of disaster prevention and response. And here you can see the scope of activities. So disaster prevention, management and response, civil protection, industrial, fire, nuclear and radiation safety, elimination of the Chernobyl disaster consequences, administration of material reserves, and saving on waters, including inspection of small vessels. Anyway, any system needs to be improved. And in 2018, the National Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy was approved. And in 2019, in all administrative regions, the regional DRR strategies were launched. National strategy signed by the Minister for Emergency Situations, considered by Sustainable Development Goal National Coordinator, and approved by the Prime Minister. There are 5 main principles of the national strategy. Transition from disaster management to risk management, strengthening the role of internal factors in risk management, strengthening the role of extensive territorial risks, defining the role of profile sectors, which will provide emergency response at national level, and transition from information about existing threats to knowledge about them. And this one is particular for population, and I will talk about it later on. Based on those 5 principles, the action plan were developed with 5 main components. It's development of the national platform legislation. And when I'm speaking about development, it's not about doing something from scratch. It means analyzing and improving it. So this is a developing of national legislation. Next one is disaster risk analysis, intellectual control and decision support systems development, improvement of disaster response technologies, including development and manufacturing of new machinery and equipment, and safety culture promotion in all areas of life. That was, let's say, some practice, some theory, and let me bring some practice to the audience. So here you can see on the slide the Republican Center for Emergency and Management Response Center. Operates 24/7 in 3 modes: day-to-day, high preparedness, and emergency. Main tasks are operation management and control during emergency response, monitoring and forecasting of emergency situations, and notification of population and government agencies. So here you can see the general monitoring and forecasting system. So again, the Ministry for Emergency Situation as the leading authority in the center, and you can see the organization which is involved to this process. And on the left side, unfortunately, it's not clear. I think you will not be able to see all those threats, all those kind of which we monitor and forecast. So this is a variety of risks and threats. So starting from nuclear accidents, accidents on hazardous facilities, on chemical facilities, natural disasters, the pandemic, and whatever. So, and this is everything is united in one system. So a few words about emergency response. In Belarus, there are more than 300 of professional emergency units which are ready to respond to any kind of accidents, natural disasters or chemical release, for example. On the slide, you can see the best one. This is Republican Special Response Team, which is entitled to act during a major accident. By the way, not only in Belarus, but also abroad as the International Session Team, classified by the according to the UN standards. Belarus is a manufacturing country with very well-developed industry, and just to support words with facts, there are more than 16,000 of industrial enterprises in industry sector. So that is why the management of technological risks and providing the industrial safety is vital for us. So to cope with that block of issue, the Industrial Safety Supervision Department acts as the competent authority on the behalf of the Ministry for Emergency Situations. The main goal of this department is to prevent any technological accidents by control of safety conditions and enterprises at all stages, planning, building, or operating. So what is the next step for providing sustainable resilience for community? People themselves. Public should be actively involved to the DRR policy. And today it isn't enough just to provide the access to the information. The comprehensive knowledge and safety culture should be promoted. So, and again, here in Belarus, the Ministry for Emergency Situations taking a lead in this field. There are lots of methods, tools, and variety of approaches, but one of the most efficient is life safety education centers. Over there, people can not only exercise how to act during an emergency situation, but also how to avoid and prevent possible accidents. Thanks to high-tech and innovative technologies, the education process has never been so attractive, interesting, and positive. There are 9 centers in Belarus, and education covers all main fields such as fire, public, transport, crime, ecosystem, industrial, nuclear, and radiation safety, civil protection, natural disasters, hygiene, health life activities, and first aid rendering.
Evgeny, if I can ask you to be please wrapping up.
Yes, I'm just summing up. So, inclusive DRR policy with unified system for natural technological disaster prevention management and response proves its efficiency. One government body, which is responsible for risks related to natural disaster and technological accidents, so provide a high level of readiness to disaster-related threats and challenges. Public must be actively involved to DRR policy. Just information today is not enough. Knowledge and safety culture should be promoted. Role of experts and high competent specialists is essential. I haven't talked about this during the presentation, but this topic is massive and deserves separate discussions. So, but everybody understand that behind the success of any organizations, very experienced and motivated and knowledgeable specialist stays on. And last but not least, the international relations is a key. We believe that this is a key in a solution-seeking process and in transboundary safety and security. It has to be transparent and open for any interested party. Protection of peoples and environment is actually a core of the international humanitarian and ecological law. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Many thanks for these insights and really giving us a comprehensive overview of how the integrated risk management approach can work at the government level across different players, and also national and local levels. And what you highlighted about international cooperation, of course, remains extremely important. We would now move to an example of how land use planning can contribute to accident prevention and response in the context of industrial and chemical accidents. And for this, I'd like to give the floor to Martin Merkofer, who leads the major accident and earthquake mitigation section of the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. Martin, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to present you in the next few minutes the land use planning approach for major accident prevention in Switzerland. Next slide, please. First, I would like to give you a short introduction to the scope of application of the Major Accident Prevention Ordinance in Switzerland. Then I introduce you to a key instrument, the risk assessment approach, that is applied on the one hand for the siting of hazardous installations, but on the other hand also for the coordination of land use planning and major accident prevention. Next slide, please. In Switzerland, the Swiss Major Accident Prevention Ordinance does not only cover chemical establishments, it also covers railway lines, main roads where dangerous goods are transported, as well as high pressure gas and oil pipelines. And we have seen in the past that good coordination between land use planning and major accident prevention is not only crucial for chemical establishments, but also for these linear system installations as railway lines, roads, or high pressure gas pipelines. Next slide, please. As I have said at the beginning, in Switzerland, we apply a risk assessment approach, and this can be very helpful also for the coordination with land use planning. And in applying a risk assessment approach, it is important that also risk levels, acceptable risk levels, are determined. That helps to judge finally if a risk is acceptable or not. And we have divided the probability consequence diagram in Switzerland into 3 levels: an acceptable level, a not acceptable level, and the orange one in the middle, that's the transition region. If the risk is in the transition region, then there has to be done a weight of interest between the protection of the population, cost for additional safety measures for the operator to reduce the risk further. And if we are talking about land use planning, also the public interest or the need that a new construction zone has to be built in the vicinity of a chemical installation. Next slide, please. In 2013, we have developed a guideline that describes the coordination process between land use planning and major accidents prevention. And such a guideline is very important because it creates a legal certainty for all stakeholders involved. So for the major accident prevention authorities, the land use planning authorities, as well as the owners of the hazardous installations. Next slide, please. And that's one of the key elements. I always say that's the entry gates, the consultation areas for coordination. In Switzerland, we have consultation areas in the vicinity of the hazardous installations, and these consultation areas are publicly available and are the basis to define if a coordination with land use planning is needed or not. And on this slide, you can see that we have several hazardous installations. On the one hand, we have chemical establishments. Therefore, we have the yellow consultation areas. We have high pressure gas pipelines with the purple consultation area. And we have railway lines with the red and main roads with the green consultation area where dangerous goods are transported. And for everybody, it is visible because these consultation areas are publicly available. if a change of a land use zone in such a consultation area is planned, then a coordination is needed. Next slide, please. And with this slide, I would like to show you that risk assessment methods in coordination with land use planning can be very valuable and have also an added value. On the left-hand side, you can see a probability consequence diagram for a high-pressure gas pipeline, and the actual state has been judged as acceptable. And if we now increase the number of persons in the vicinity of this high-pressure gas pipeline by about 150 persons, then you can see that we have a shift in the risk sum curve from the actual state, the black risk sum curve, to the red risk sum curve. That's because we have, in the case, a potential case of an accident at the high-pressure gas pipelines, also more potential fatalities. And with this slide, I would like to show you that with risk assessment methods, you can show how the risk will shift after a change in the land use plan. And if you have risk assessment methods combined with assessment criteria, as I have shown on slide 4, this can help to decide whether or not a risk is still acceptable after a densification in the vicinity of a hazardous installation or not. Next slide, please. My two main conclusions with respect to the topic I have presented to you now. On the one hand, a good coordination between land use planning and major accident prevention is the key to ensure that the risks around hazardous installations do not increase thoughtless and that the developments are sustainable. And on the other hand, risk assessment methods and evaluation criteria, and I think there is very important that the criteria are broadly accepted in a country by the authorities, by the operators. These are good tools to assess whether a risk can be judged as acceptable or not after an increase of the population density. And if the risk is not acceptable, then of course measures have to be implemented either by the operator of the hazardous installation, according to the polluter pays principle, or on the spatial planning side to reduce the risk. Next slide, please. And this picture shows that the pressure for densification in the vicinity of hazardous installations will further increase. And that's why a good coordination is becoming more and more important in the future. And with that slide, I would like to finish my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin. And indeed, we've now heard about the overall international policy framework at the level of the European Union. We heard about an example of a national planning and coordination policy coherence system, and now you presented us with a very impressive, very thorough, and interesting explanation of how this works from the land planning, land use point of view. Now that we have had really a scene setter on this topic from three distinguished panelists, we move to interaction with our audience. I'm told that we have over 360 people online with us. It's an impressive number for this panel. And what we're going to do now, colleagues, is use the Slido tool to have a poll. There'll be a few questions, just 4 questions, and I would like to ask you, when you see a question appearing on the screen, to submit an answer to the question. There are different types of questions. Some of them require you to just choose one of the 2 options. Some are multiple choice, and some will require you to put in, a key concept or a short message, short line, which will then appear in the word cloud. So with this, I'm asking our distinguished audience to please be prepared. And I think now what you need to do is we need to have a QR code on the screen. As far as I can see it, it's up there already. And we need to if you're using your handheld device, your phone, I think you need to scan the QR code, and then you will be able to submit an answer using the link that you will be going to through the QR code. So I'd like to ask the technical team to make sure that we have now the link and the QR code up, please. And if this is the case, I'd like to please ask that the first question, which is what we call a warm-up question, appears. The question is up. I do not see actually, unfortunately, what is on the screen, but the question is in terms of governance of disaster risk reduction, do you agree that national DRR platforms are the best place to address tech risks? Please, we're now opening this question for your reactions, dear audience, yes or no, and then we'll see the result after. Thank you very much. I think there is an overwhelming majority of answers here going for national DRR platforms as the critical part of the response in I think most of the countries around the world. I would like to ask to put up the second question, please. And this will be what we call a free input question. So you please just identify a keyword or short, really short sentence, because this will be word cloud. In your view, what is the most important element of technological disaster risk management? Technological disaster risk management. Please, your answers. And here we're seeing the word cloud already being formed. I think we'll give it just a few more seconds for all the participants in the audience to be able to come through with their answers. For now, on the very small screen that I'm seeing, prevention is really standing out as the biggest word in the word cloud. And this will be a multiple choice question, and we will display the results in bar graphs. So the question is, in your view, what are the key challenges in industrial and chemical accident risk management in your country? Please select up to 3 answers. And the choices are between knowledge and expertise, financial resources, governance and disaster risk strategies, transboundary cooperation, climate change, and of course there is an I don't know option as well. It would be very important to know that all of these elements were mentioned by our distinguished speakers in the preceding sessions. We'd like now to hear from the audience, what do you see as key challenges in industrial and chemical accident risk management in your country? Please. Okay, I'm being told we have a bit of a technical issue. I think another question was being displayed that we actually took out because of shortness of time. So this was now I think what we're seeing on the screen is an answer to the question, which reads, in your view, what is the most important element of natural disaster risk management? So that's very good to have that as well. We're very glad that colleagues are reacting in such an agile manner. It's good to have these answers. They will be recorded, and we will, of course, share the outcomes with all of you. And we can see that risk assessment, understanding risks, which can be maybe clustered in one category, are definitely coming forward as very, very strong answers. And again, because I'm only seeing the screen as a very small box, I can only see the biggest answers, indeed. So that's the way to differentiate. Make your screen small and only the big words stand out. So with this, can I please ask the technical team to put forward the multiple choice question, please, since we are a bit short on time. The question is, in your view, what are the key challenges in industrial and chemical accident risk management in your country? This is a multiple choice question, please. I will not read the possible answers again. I think you can see them on your screen. just give it a few more seconds. And I think there is also 40-second delay in displaying the results. So you can see already what is, this is a live poll. So literally results are coming in as we speak. And governance and disaster risk strategies are being highlighted by most as a challenge. Knowledge and expertise, we just heard about it from the distinguished representative of Belarus, as a key issue as well. Transboundary cooperation, the international aspects, financing, climate aspects. So these are some of the core challenges that countries are facing when dealing with industrial and chemical accident risks. And I'd like to to stress the importance of having climate change appear there on the screen. I think this points really to the nexus situation we're facing with NATEC risks as climate change effects are becoming stronger and stronger, raising the unpredictability of weather patterns and extreme events such as floods and landslides. I think industrial safety and climate change interlinkages become very, very apparent. And this also points to the importance of the climate agenda as a crucial enabler and actually, as something that we need to look at, not just because of the climate change itself. Okay, I think we can leave it at this. Governance and disaster risk strategy is really coming through as the core challenge, and we take this as a very important takeaway. And I'd like the technical team now to please put up the next and final question. Again, a multiple choice question, which reads, in your view, so please the next question, in your view, which elements of technological risk management should be integrated into broader DRR strategies, disaster risk reduction strategies? Okay, thanks again for showing us the results. So maybe right away. So this is the fourth and final question on which we are already getting some answers. Please, colleagues, asking you to contribute actively to this so that we can take away quick feedback from the audience before we proceed with our panel. Risk assessment, governance, land use planning are the top three, where over half of our participants, put them up front as the core challenges. And I'm very pleased to say that we heard today about most of these things in the presentation. So we hope that the information shared was useful and that we take this as feedback on the relevance of the topics we have selected for this event. Okay, giving it just a few more seconds. I'm not seeing the pictures changing dramatically, so perhaps we can call it a poll. Also because we are short of time, and I'd like to thank all of you for your active participation in this interactive poll, and I'd like to thank the technical team for helping us implement this. And without trying to summarize all the 4 questions, I'd like to just tell you that we will very much make this part of the session report, and hope that we can take guidance from your answers in our collaboration with UNDRR and all the colleagues who are participating in today's panel. With this, I'd like to pass now to the third part of our session, and we would like to discuss the implications that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on industrial and chemical safety. We will have one presentation by Toril Tandberg from Norway. Toril is the chair of the Industrial Accidents Convention, and we're very, very happy and privileged to have her with us. And she's also the member of the Bureau of the OECD Working Party on Chemical Accidents, and it's great and you to have the link between the two very important processes. Toril, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to your presentation, and then we will have a little bit of time for questions from the audience at the end, I think, to all of the speakers in the session 3. Thank you very much. Toril, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, distinguished chair, and thank for this introduction. I will now just give a very brief presentation on the implication of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is my presentation, thank you. And even if COVID has been going on for more than a year now, we are still in a pandemic situation. And the next slide, please. Some of the implications of the COVID-19 when it comes to industrial accident prevention, preparedness, and response. The three institutions, the European Commission, the Joint Research Centre, did a survey back in autumn 2020, and that was in cooperation with the OECD and the UNEC, and all those members, the EU members, OECD members, and UNEC countries received this survey. And of course, and we also did discuss this issue at the working party of the OECD and at the conference of the parties for the Industrial Accident Convention last year. So this has been high on the agenda because this COVID-19 pandemic is more than a health crisis. It has global impact, and it has influence on our daily life, and some of the impact on chemical and industrial safety is according to the risk assessment. It's about management, it's about preparedness and continuity planning, and it's also impact the governments and the work of the authorities that is dealing with industrial accidents prevention. And another issue is about how can we safeguard the production of critical chemicals during a pandemic. And what is also important is how can we learn from this crisis. So next slide, please. Some of the implication is that leadership and communication to the staff at the hazardous sites was so important during this pandemic crisis, and is still important. There were a lot about staffing issue for industry. That was about the key personnel and experts from abroad when you had this lockdown of the countries and less possibility to travel from country to country. We also saw that maintenance in some industries was a huge issue because it maybe led to some backlog of the maintenance of the site. Emergency plans and continuity planning, exercises and training, some of them were postponed during the pandemic. And during this pandemic, the communication between the authorities, the advice they gave and guidance they gave to industry was very important. And when it came to inspection programs, some of them were temporarily paused, and some also made remotely in inspections. And this is important to say that in spite of the situation we had last year, and maybe some of this will continue this year, and we saw that both authorities and industry managed to turn around and to do the best of the situation. Many companies, they had production and as normal. And what was mentioned in the presentation from Rachel McCann on accidents, we had a cooperation between the international organization, and thanks to the Joint Research Centre and the Major Accident Hazard Bureau to send out a lessons learned bulletin early in May last year, that there could be complication, especially with shutdown and startup of industry, and this message was really important to send out to both industry and to the authorities. So my next slide, please. This is about some lessons and challenges that came up during our meetings. And one thing is that the COVID-19 has shown us that the importance of having a mature management of change at the hazardous installation to prevent accident, and also the importance of corporate governance and strong risk management during the pandemic, and the importance of keeping up with inspections at hazardous installation, and raising the question how best to conduct inspections remotely and how to prioritize installations for inspections. And many countries also say we can do remotely inspections in the future, but it's not recommended. We have to check the terrain and the map. We should be in place. And also going through more automation and remote control, but there may be some risk when it comes to the implications for cybersecurity. So these are food for thoughts, and also food for our continuous work in the industrial safety area, because the next crisis will and might be different, but the challenges will be there, and we need to have the focus on identifying and recognizing the risk, understand the mechanism and the impact of an upcoming crisis, and not to forget to repress it, and to consider to act and how we can do the best measures, both industry and the authorities. Thank you very much. This was my last slide.
Thank you very much, Toriel. This is an extremely clear presentation. I will not try to recap in the interest of time. You just brilliantly did that. So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now open a floor still for very few minutes for any questions to our distinguished panelists, the speakers in this session, just to make sure that we don't leave without having an opportunity to interact with the audience more directly. So we don't have much time. We are really over time already with this session, but I think the fact that so many people are staying online despite us being over time shows the importance of the topic. So any questions, and I'd like to ask the technical team to help us to make them known, please, from the audience, and then after that we will go to wrap up. Okay, I can see a question for Switzerland. Is it normal for the community to have this good security always? I'm reading it as we receive it, so just please. So is it normal for the community to have this good security always? Please, Martin, question to you, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can only speak for major accident prevention. And as it was mentioned at the beginning of this session, the Sandoz accident at Schweizerhalle was not only a starting point for the Industrial Accidents Convention, it was also the starting point for the Swiss Major Accident Prevention Ordinance. And we have now several years experience, and we try to develop our guidelines and to adopt them also to the challenges that they are coming. And from that point of view, I think it's important also the collaboration that is mentioned to improve the guidelines and the documents we have. And we try to improve that also in the future.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Just checking with the team if there are other questions coming from the audience. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So I would like to now, first of all, warmly thank all our panelists, our speakers, for being here today, and really for staying on till the end of the event. We really highly appreciate your time, your contributions, your insights. Now, I do have a concluding remarks in the form of a PowerPoint, which is, of course, something you would appreciate the most at this point in time, especially given that we are basically at lunchtime. So, but in fact, the fact that this is a PowerPoint makes it very easy, because I don't actually need to say much. I'd like to ask, please, to put the slides up now. And we can leave them with you, colleagues, and also the dear audience, as a practical, summary of follow-ups. And I must say, the team has been taking notes and then turning them into these slides as you spoke. So this is not a pre-cooked, product. It's something that we have tried to make live and really reflecting the points being made by the panel in all three sessions. So if I can have the first slide, you will see there that we really believe that taking cues and learning from past accidents and focusing on prevention, and then of course understanding the industrial chemical accident risk management as part of a much broader set of strategies, multi-hazard risk management strategies. Here is just a snapshot of the instruments that are out there from different international organizations. And of course, countries have in their toolkit national regulations, as Martin, for example, just mentioned the Swiss Ordinance, which was born out of it. So that's one point, and then we as international organizations can work together. Okay, I just want to make sure, do we have the correct version of the presentation, please? Because I don't think this is the correct version. Anyway, I will continue, but I want to make sure that we have the correct version because there was a lot of input into it as we progressed through the session. So that's one key takeaway. The second one is on policy coherence. We heard about how important it is to have collaboration. First of all, in my view, international, national, then national, regional, local levels, and then across ministries. Because we strongly believe that while one ministry can have a clear coordinating role, it is never about just emergency situations ministries. It's about civil protection, environmental protection, state inspections of all sorts, land use planning very much so, critical infrastructure management, and I would also add to that list relationship with business community. Then NATEC risk as a very particular story, a very particular category. I will not repeat. We just had that discussion, and the fact that natural hazard risk managers need to sit at the same level, at the same table with technological risk reduction people is for me an obvious takeaway. And then examples of good risk management, risk governance. We heard some really good examples today. We need more, and we will be looking for more. And then finally, transboundary cooperation is a major takeaway for us. The importance of interinstitutional cross-sectoral cooperation that needs to happen now also across borders. And of course, we realize that it is very often much easier in a setting like the European Union, where very strong institutional incentives and mechanisms exist for transboundary cooperation for countries to get together on these topics. I think beyond the European Union, though, in our ECE region, which includes 56 countries, and I would dare say globally, we need to be able to talk about what are the practical incentives for transboundary cooperation. Having a convention is not enough. Of course, Industrial Accidents Convention of EC, for example, is just a regional convention covering only the 56 member states. But we know, we are very aware that the convention is the starting point, and we need mechanisms and we need incentive structures for countries and non-state players also to be able to work across boundaries. Please, a final slide before the thank you. If you could just bring up the slide number 5. Yes, so this is okay. This is a set of recommendations by an area of the roadmap, which we spoke about before, so I will not go into details. And you can see that there are some concrete recommendations for implementation. And I would like to end, colleagues, by asking you to help us fill these boxes, not in a formal way. Please give us additional ideas for these recommendations. What else needs to be done? If I could most kindly, on behalf of Ricardo and myself and our team organizing this event, ask all our speakers, as well as colleagues from the audience, to send to us, for example, to my colleague Franziska Hirsch, who is managing this line of work at UNICE, your practical suggestions for recommendations for implementation. Going forward, under each of these roadmap areas, understanding and communicating future risks, we heard how much risk awareness and information about risks is being highlighted by everybody as a major gap. Then inclusive and collaborative systems for governance. Again, governance, I think, came on top in the poll, so it makes me very reassured that the roadmap is spot on here. Then investment in resilience measures, without money, and also without institutionalizing these investments, not making them an ad hoc, a reactive type of investment, I think we will not be able to succeed. And then finally, preparedness for response. So under these 4 categories, we're looking forward to your suggestions on practical steps that need to be taken. We as UNECE will be delighted to work with UNDRR and other partners, with all of you, to make the topic of today a practical topic for policymakers, for decision makers around the region. We would like to make sure that technological, chemical risks are seen as a central part of a broader array of risks, that we can focus on prevention, and that we can really invest in transboundary cooperation going forward. I'd like to thank everybody who was involved in preparing this event, Franziska, Max, and our colleagues from the DRR side, also the technical moderation team that has made this possible despite the very complicated structure of the session, and of course all of you dear speakers and the audience for being here with us today. Thank you, and wishing you a good rest of the day.